second graduate student speaker of the semester. My name is Kara Flynn. I'm the Research and Educational Services Archivist in Special Collections, and I recruit students for this speaker series and facilitate it. The goal of the series is to encourage graduate student research in special collections and to provide students with a platform to share that research. Graduate students from all disciplines are welcome to participate, and if you are or know of a graduate student who might be interested in participating in the series, please feel free to talk to me after tonight's presentation. And before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick shout out. Thank you to Dina, our administrative assistant, for getting our snacks for tonight and for managing our recording of tonight's talk so that people who couldn't attend can see it later on YouTube. And to Kelsey, our library director of public relations, for helping to promote tonight's event. So tonight, we have Sam Benz, a second-year graduate assistant in English and a Master of Fine Arts candidate in creative writing, and he will be presenting his talk to Labor for Justice, Arkansas, and Socialism. In his research, Sam utilized a number of the collections here, including the Socialist Party papers and the papers of various individuals, including but not limited to James Bales, William Henry Cobb, and Charles J. Finger. Sam's talk will explore the genre of socialist writing, paired with a creative nonfiction piece from his research. So without further ado, welcome Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off, well, actually, since we are talking about socialism, we have to be kind of social. So I want you to kind of just like introduce yourself to the people around you, since, this is about community. Especially the people you don't know.
I'm Dina.
Sasha.
Very nice to meet you as well. Thank
You're awesome. I'm a math child.
Awesome, thank y'all. I already feel like so much better about this. I also wanted to begin with gratitude. Thank you so much for all of you for coming, taking time out of your day to hear what some socialists about like 100 years ago and onwards said about this struggle of which we are all a part. I'm grateful for all of you and also for the diverse movement of which we are a part of. I also wanted to thank the absolutely tremendous staff here at Special Collections, which I think is the gem of Mullins Library, honestly. Also, what better location to talk about socialism than a library, right? So very excited to be here. I wanted to thank Kara Flynn, Dina, Blair Hollander, Kelsey Lovewell, and Joshua Youngblood, who all have helped me so much throughout this process and have been nothing but supportive. Also, special shout out to Tony Jensen and the nonfiction class I'm in this semester. This class has really kind of lit my brain on fire, thinking about nonfiction and how to use archives and documents to turn that into a creative piece. Also related to this, I wanted to thank every university staff or faculty member who shows solidarity towards students, especially graduate students. Because right now, graduate students in the University of California system are fighting for a cost of living adjustment, so I wanted to give a shout out to them. And so there's a lot of suffering out there in the world, and I think there's going to continue to be more suffering unless we kind of come together and do what we can to enact change, be the change. to labor for justice. And as an introduction to this presentation, as I explored the socialist history of Arkansas, I stumbled upon a quote that kind of narrowed my focus, right? Because there's all sorts of collections related to this topic, and so this quote kind of narrowed it down for me. Mitchell and I did not talk of history. I am no historian. We did not talk of his rumpled suit, gray hair, or family life. I'm no reporter. We talked about men and women and children who struggle for as long as they are able against odds stacked higher than any of us can ever see. And so, although I may not talk directly about a lot of historical moments, I hope that through the creative nonfiction piece that I wrote, that I hope a lot of these moments and events are revealed and exposed through the writing. Whether it's Clay Folks writing about Joseph McCarthy's Un-American Activities Committee, or even Kate O'Hare, who was a socialist activist from Kansas who made her way down Arkansas for a little bit. Also, shout out to my partner and her child, Ruby. And so and so as I narrowed down the focus, I really wanted to focus on the language that was being used with all of these writers, the genre of socialist writing specifically. What does socialist writing look like? How does it operate? As well as Arkansas socialists and their own philosophies. I'm super curious about the genre of socialist writing because there's really an insurgent working class poetry community happening right now all over the world. And as a poet in the creative writing and translation program, I'm very curious what poetry does for people outside traditional literary spaces, from farmers markets to even on the Razorback Greenway. And as I was kind of investigating this socialist writing genre, I stumbled upon a great interview with Vijay Prashad. And he says that socialist writing is about seeing readers as a part of our process and not just as consumers who must buy the commodities we produce. And so socialist writing should be a conversation. And so I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation with you. And a little bit more about this genre of socialist writing is Vijay talks about this thing called the detonator sentence, which is very interesting. In academia, we often have this thing called the thesis statement, which is kind of like, all right, you have a thesis, but Vijay talks about this detonator sentence, a sentence that captures the essence of your argument, like a kernel. For example, he mentions W.E.B. Du Bois in Souls of Black Folk, asks, how does it feel to be a problem? And Vijay says that this was Du Bois' detonator sentence, right? The detonator sentence takes this moment of language and politicizes it, kind of creates a new vocabulary. And that relates to so many things in our current times, such as the word organic or sustainable, which are used so frequently that they almost become meaningless. And then Vijay also talks about manuals, which is really interesting, or even governmental reports, which are very formal and almost kind of impossible to read. You would think these very formal documents that relate to our lives would be easy to read, but they're not. They're almost anti-democratic. He goes on to mention that many manuals on things like smokeless chimneys and waterless toilets, which are written in earnest tones, but the manuals don't ask the questions such as, if you already have these things, like a smokeless chimney or a waterless toilet, why aren't they in Nepal, where women are dying at alarming rates from lung diseases? And so it's just a matter of taking this writing and adding a new element to it. And that kind of relates to this creative nonfiction piece, which I hope kind of relates to this fostering of a new imagination, kind of taking in various phrases and utilizing writing that's out there and kind of transforming it. And I also wanted to say that this piece that I wrote, that I collaborated with all these writers, was heavily inspired by remixes and samples, the collage genre, and also the book Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine, and fantastic creative nonfiction piece. And one of the phrases that stuck out to me as I was doing this research was the phrase, the Museum of Social Change. And I just, as soon as I saw that, that just felt like a title to me. So I'll go ahead and start.
Is it an extra?
Yeah. Perfect. Preface, toward a definition. To convert private into collective, for the common good. To put an end to the vices of mankind and the miseries resulting from these vices. Socialist is a rather quiet and thoughtful worker. To be self-contained in victory. To realize that the world will move on. To remember that while we live, we must help the world move easier. To consider oneself an ally, proud to do one's part. What is surplus value? What is a commodity? What is the class struggle? Free man and slave, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed. The Museum of Social Change is being stocked with articles and items indicating graphically the swift decline of the capitalist order of society. We turned to production for profit. We collected our interest and rent. We have underlying us humanitarian principles, a cooperative group, equal owners. We can work together harmoniously and to great mutual advantage. We turned to production for profit. We turned to prod, to production, for profit, 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 profit. Being from one of the greatest cooperative nations, Denmark, I don't need to enlarge on the benefits and values of cooperation, equal ownership. Getting half a heifer dressed and delivered at 5 cents. So you find yourself caught between the horns of a dilemma, a fairly cheap place somewhere in the suburbs of Inc. No, I don't think the U.S. wants to make peace. Why? Peace is subversive. I would love to chew my end of the rag with you and listen to chew your end of the same rag. Hastily yours. And invested the money as we got it in machines of a speedier bent. My present mood is not a light. My complaint stems from a rupture of my routine. The stern old taskmaster grips us by the neck and holds our noses to the grindstone and makes us love it. Occasionally, however, we revolt, kick over our traces, spit on the grindstone. There is a fine, large, exhilarating kick. But the poor slave who just can't do it in gay courage gets no kick out of it. No kick out of it. An attack, remorse, condemns oneself bitterly for one's insubordination. No kick out of it, and rushes back, and rushes, and rushes, and rushes, to lay his nose on the grindstone. Hastily yours, this is also like part performance. Yeah. No kick out of it, horns of a dilemma, but cooperative, but harmoniously, underlying us, being stopped is change. At Commonwealth College in Mena, Arkansas, students and teachers work together to assure independence, academic freedom. Radical college denounced. Mrs. John F. Wyman wants to curb the college in Polk County. She is an honorary state regent of the Daughters of American Colonists. Commonwealth College, an institution with subversive and undemocratic ideals. It is giving Arkansas a black eye. God-fearing folk of the neighborhood, not too sure. All of a doggone sudden, a bunch of foreigners from heaven only knew where. The The school won the goodwill of many, especially the farmers. At Commonwealth, it is common indeed to see PhDs washing dishes, splitting wood, or milking the cows. Local enemies, chambers of commerce, service clubs, located in one of the most backward sections of the state, deep in a rural region, 12 miles from its post office, 6 miles from highway, a wild black bear was killed 3 miles from campus by a native farmer armed with an axe. A list of courses, labor orientation, elements of political economy, imperialism and fascism, social psychology, labor problems, strategy and tactics, history of American labor movement, farmers' problems and organization, labor drama, proletarian literature and creative writing, effective writing, labor journalism, public speaking, drawing and composition and poster design, fact-finding methods, and typing. Picture of Joe Jones' mural on the walls of the Commons, a striking portrayal of scenes from the lives of the oppressed of the state. There are more people imprisoned in the penitentiaries and penal institutions of the United States than there are enrolled in all of our colleges and universities. Down in the dark, noisome, loathsome hells, to become a convict, to serve, to determine the nature of prison's vengeance, undernourishment, bad housing, bad clothing, unpaid labor, mental stagnation, and spiritual disintegration, coached in the arts of brutality and terrorism, to inflict mental and physical torture. Is it possible for society? Is it possible for society? Is it possible for society to inflict mental and physical torture upon delinquents without injury to itself? Without injury to itself? The modern funeral in this country, a symptom of social decay. It is just too wet to plow, and invested the money as we got it in machines of a speedier bent. But what about the other? But what about the other? But what about the other? Do they show signs or symptoms of a deep uneasiness? Probably more concerned about the football games. But what about the others? But what about the others? Few pastors, showmanship, collection box, compete with Satan's mass production in the field of amusement and entertainment. A system of horse and dog racing, Sunday ball games and picture shows, gambling and stocks and bonds, exorbitant profits, rents and interest, low wages and etc., low wages and etc., low wages and etc. The clergy has always been content. The United States, a country of organized crime, compelled to relinquish under the present system, profit instead of use the present system, to relinquish the present system, to relinquish a part of the wealth, to those who own the tools, land, and machinery with which they work. Are machines labor's enemy? Multiplying human power. Instead of driving 3 or 4 horses, can now turn on the power of 20, 40, or 60 horses, and invested the money as we got it in machines of a speedier bent. In recent years, radicalism has offered new fields. Can't you take your work a little easier? You'll never get it all done anyway, will you? Can't you take your work a little easier? You'll never get it all done anyway, will you? And invested the money as we got it in machines of a speedier bent. Can't you take your work a little easier? You'll never get it all done anyway, will you? You cannot make a killing at the roulette without depriving someone of winnings. Making a killing, winnings, your winnings would not be there had the fellow who created winnings, gotten the full social value of his labor. The present profit system is nothing more, not less, is nothing more, not less. The present system is nothing more, is less, is nothing more, not less than a huge gambling device. Getting something for nothing, getting something, getting. Every young student expects the trump card or the loaded dice, to win in the game of life all the things, to win in the game, to win a freedom from manual labor, to win. Arkansas, the wonder state, fertile soil, great forest, corrupt politics, charming rivers, rugged mountain peaks, probate systems, picturesque valleys, gorgeous sunsets, low wages, and long hours. The term is quite applicable. The wonder state, wonder low wages, wonder long hours, wonder corrupt politics. The bootlicking town marshal falsely arrested 8 men and enslaved them on a timber job he was doing under contract. The wonder state, first state of the Union to have a case of this kind. We expanded industry to the limit, that is, under the capitalist flag. Will you supinely submit and allow? We expanded industry to the limit, that is, under the capitalist flag. Yourselves to be pauperized to the extent. We expanded industry to the limit, that is, under the capitalist flag, of becoming so desperate in your struggle for food and shelter that you will be imprisoned and made to work on the state's own farms, and made to work, or will you demand the state one step further? State made to work. State the state to engage in producing not only food, but clothing, shelter, fuel, transportation, and all other commodities of life, for use and not for profit, not for profit, not for profit. The most interesting thing to the rural inhabitants of Western Arkansas right now is the fact that polk salad is coming out. War may break out, fascism may fasten its bloody fingers about the throat of our people, floods may wipe out whole cities, leaving death, and destruction in their wake. Congress may continue to struggle. Congress continues to struggle with the problem of how a nation can feed itself by destroying its foodstuffs. Strikes and lookouts, old and new political parties of the leading big dailies. But the most interesting thing to the rural inhabitants of Western Arkansas right now is polk salad coming out. Crime, rooted in social conditions, natural fruits, consequences, and made to work, consequences of the capitalist system, and made to work. Leaving death to win is nothing more, not less than, winnings, low wages, and etc. When the facts brought out consequences of the capitalist system, time to call a halt, and made to work, time to call a halt, trace the umbilical cord, rooted in social conditions, yet the public demands a continuation of the circus, circus of un-American activities, circus of low wages and etc., circus of winnings, time to call a halt. A continuation of the circus because it furnishes televisual sports and scandals, un-American activities committee circus, circus of American capitalism, low wages and etc., hopped up by hysteria to arrest the trend, to arrest the trend, to arrest the trend of self-defense, American capitalism and self-defense, arrests, prevent an understanding for the trend, great global trend toward socialism. Oh, thank you. American capitalism grows high pressure, highly paid, ballyhoo boys, exhaust the possibilities, exhaust the last argument of kings, a world holocaust any day it pleases, monopoly of press, monopoly of radio, the pulpit, monopoly of schools, communication. Try to equate capitalism with democracy, with free, peace-loving society. Try to equate, 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 try to equate. American capitalism, this equate capitalism with democracy strategy sweeping this unhappy country. We are disgracefully ignorant about other peoples. Voting, limited to the large property holders. American capitalism, permanent stagnation, ineradicable decay. Charity the poor. The poor have given to the rich palaces and yachts, infinite freedom. The poor have given security, have given peace of mind. The poor always on edge of danger. Danger the poor uncertain, uncertain the next day's food, uncertain next month's rent, terrified of living, lest they lose their job, terrified of dying, lest their wives and children starve. Is there a conflict between wage earners and capital? Is there a conflict between wage earners and capital? Is there a conflict between wage earners and capital? Is there a conflict? can't you take your work a little easier? You'll never get it all done anyway, will you? And I think we have time to just talk if you want to do that. Or questions, if you have questions, or talk. Yeah.
So were all the phrases from your reading, or did you add things in?
I tried to keep it pretty direct. There were a few things that I changed, like verbs and fragmentization, but mostly everything in here was taken from multiple archives and documents that I was reading.
Can you talk a little about Commonwealth College?
Commonwealth College, yeah. So Commonwealth College was originally located in Louisiana, and interestingly enough, they kind of had some funding problems, as you know, these things usually do. But slowly it moved to Mena, Arkansas, where a bunch of educators would flock all over the U.S. to, kind of teach at this college. And this was around the 1930s. I think Commonwealth College started maybe before the 1920s, but kind of really built itself up in the 1930s. Yeah, it was really interesting looking at their materials list, because a lot of it was like, I need to get a sheep, or a horse, a mule, or I was fixing the truck of Bethlehem's truck or something, which I guess is a person's name. But yeah, this college was just really interesting in the work they did, and how nobody got paid. The teachers that worked there, they didn't get paid, so they just got housing, free food. There was a dining hall. Yeah, it was a very interesting college. And I will say, this is kind of like the beginning of my research, which is the great thing, is that this is kind of like an ongoing process, as creativity always is. But yeah. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about your process of going from what you read in the archives to creating this fantastic?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff I read was just I had to go through like so many newspaper clippings and so many just catalogs, but oftentimes, especially with Clay Folks, shout out to Clay Folks, he was just writing so many just nuggets. And I think as I read through a lot of the nonfiction stuff, I would just look for these nuggets that kind of spoke to me. One of the things Clay Folks wrote that I just loved was, where was it? And now you caught yourself in between the horns of a dilemma. I was just like, that's a nugget that can just be included and stand on its own. So I was really looking for these phrases that could stand on their own, but also kind of go along with the word as a whole. I guess another thing that I've been thinking about is, and I asked this in my creative nonfiction classes, how do we kind of use archives to translate them into creativity? And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of potential with remixing and sampling writing. And maybe that goes along with this genre of socialist writing, is that that the moment you write something, it's almost not yours. A lot of poets talk about that. The moment you have something on paper or utter it,
Leave it.
it's like no longer yours. And so that's something I've been thinking a lot about too. Yeah.
Did you try to what degree did you try to follow like a time linear approach with the clippings? Like, are they all from the beginning earlier and the end later? Is that
Yeah,
what you try to do, or just not at all?
It really depended, because a lot of the times, you know, like a Clay Folks essay may not have had a date on it or something. And that's the interesting thing about archives and documents, is that sometimes the author may not have a date or something. And I think that goes along with the style too of mashup and collage work, is that it kind of is the antithesis of chronology, right? I've been reading a lot of work that doesn't really abide by chronology. A lot of fiction writers are really picking up on this new kind of writing style, like, and you see this in movies too, where, you know, you might have one scene at the beginning of the movie, but it's actually the end of a movie, which I've been fascinated with that form as well. And so, yeah, I tried to play with chronology a little bit, and even the structure of it, including like a piece, maybe a phrase at the beginning, and then maybe adding that phrase again in the middle, or adding that phrase towards the end. So kind of playing with structure and that sort of thing was really fun.
I'm just curious, have you ever done something like this before, where you've taken like historical materials and remixed them, or is this your first?
This is my
pass?
first time trying this. In my creative nonfiction class, I'm working on an essay about transportation as well, which kind of relates to this too, especially public transportation. A lot of people don't have access to a car and that sort of thing. And with transportation as well, I mean, there's so much being written about it. It's hard to kind of like take all of this information and kind of sift through it. But yeah, this is my first time just kind of taking archives and just seeing what I can do, whether it's formally or translating them phonetically and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of potential in it, because it kind of, what I'm hoping for this conversation is also to supplement the conversation I'm having with people hundreds of years ago, which is great, because I mean, that's the great thing about archives, is that when you look at them, you're kind of breathing new life into them, and you're able to kind of bring them into the contemporary world. And it was so interesting looking at these archives and like realizing that this was 100 years ago, but yet there are still so many similarities, especially here going on here in Arkansas. So yeah.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up. It certainly refers to a kind of Marxist dialectical understanding of history, that the more things change, the more they stay the same. I really enjoyed your work. I think it's important to have this socialist fire while we're here, really in the belly of the beast. We have the company, the world's largest retailer, and a company that has changed the way that we grow our animal food to be completely capitalistic. What do you think is the potential for socialist politics here in this community, and how at all do you connect socialism with a message of hope?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I'll say is just look at this room. I mean, the fact that so many of us are here willing to learn about the socialist past of Arkansas, I mean, that just gives me so much hope. And the fact that what'd you think? But one second. But I've been thinking about like how something capitalism does to us is make us very hyper individualistic. And something I've been thinking about is just community, but also beloved community in like the MLK Jr. sense, and the fact that I feel like Arkansas especially is experiencing these three evils of militarism, racism, and what's the other one? Militarism, racism, and that too. But yeah, I mean, the great thing about Arkansas is that we are so focused on hospitality and taking care of each other. And so my hope is that in the next several years or decades, or who knows how long it'll take, but that we just start caring about each other and kind of remove ourselves from this individualistic lens and really focus on, how can I cultivate a sense of community and belonging with the people around me.
What does that phrase, where does it come from, the beloved?
That's straight from Martin Luther King Jr. He's fantastic. That was specifically in a speech he gave. He talks about the 3 evils of militarism, racism, and there's another one I can't recall. But I've been thinking about beloved community a lot and what it looks like. And something else related to that is I think about the Marshallese community in Springdale and how, a lot of these people are immigrants specifically for a job, specifically for work. And so how do we welcome them into our community so that they're not just here to work, so that they are a part of the living and breathing that our community is doing?
Can I ask a question about the sort of artistry of the structure of your work? What inspired your use of repetition and playing around with the structure of the page as far as where the words are?
Yeah, if it's okay with everybody, there's this song that Steve Reich did, and what he did is he took this phrase. Let's see. So the Harlem Six were 6 black youths arrested for a murder of Margaret Sugar, a Hungarian refugee, in Harlem in the weeks following the Little Fruit Stand riot of 1964. And one of them had this recording, and I'll see. So Steve Reich was a huge influence with that kind of stylistic choice. It's just kind of like getting into the collage mindset and that repetition mindset, especially because there are a few things that kind of need reiterating, especially because we always need a reminder of the things going on around us, and so a lot of it is kind of like that reminding.
I do think it contributes to the timelessness of the topic. Reframes, not only is all of this material stuff that could easily represent things happening currently, but as well just the physical structure and it's sort of spacey a little bit, the way that it's written, it just sort of gives an air of it surpasses time and it's really sort of
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I feel like a lot of this does revolve around time and who has time, who doesn't have time, and that sort of thing. I also wanted to, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I also wanted to kind of use the fragmentary form to kind of represent, so much of the fragmentary nature of our culture right now. Awesome. Well, Ruby said it best. So, yeah? Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming out. Oh, yes, they're all yours.
of